Well, thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. What a great thing to have so much interest, and thanks for Kaz and Zoe for putting so much work into coordinating this. Yeah, as Kaz said, I work for the National Trust for Scotland, and we have an exciting project called NTS Wipeout, which is really about invasive non-native species control. But my first slide, I just wanted to put this up just to remind us why we are tackling invasive non-native species. Our generation and the next generation have two big challenges, particularly climate change and the loss of biodiversity. And you may or may not be surprised to see that invasive non-native species is actually a bigger threat to biodiversity than climate change. When we look at this top table here, we see that invasive species are actually one of the biggest cause of extinction since the 1600s. Now, these are global figures, but if we look at the state of nature, the situation for biodiversity is not looking great. The trends in Scotland are 40% loss of abundance, countered by a 39% increase, with some species moving further north, possibly due to global warming. And this important document, the strategic document that was developed in updated in 2015, gives us some form of a national strategy to try and deal with invasive species. But all this really is the reason why National Trust for Scotland are taking it so seriously, and why we've developed this Project Wipeout. We've been tackling invasive species for a number of years, mainly using volunteers, and they've done absolutely sterling work. They've already sort of held the tide back in many ways, but this wipeout control has now managed to obtain funding through Nature Scot, the Biodiversity Challenge Fund, and also through the People's Post Lottery. And this is amounting to something like £500,000 over 2 years. And we're tackling, as Kaz was saying, across around about 10 properties initially. And it's dealing with all the big major bullies, the skunk, cabbage, Japanese knotweed, Himalayan balsam, and of course, Rhododendron ponticum, which is a particular problem in our properties within the biosphere in the northwest. So many thanks to those grant funders. This is, if you like, the biggest push that National Trust for Scotland have carried out, and it will be part of a longer term programme to sustain the work that we do through Project Wipeout. So it needs to be a long-term programme. As we all know, we need to follow up the work and maintain the work that we carried out through the Wipeout project. So yeah, the properties in the northwest, well, we've got Kintail, we've got Balmacara, we have Torridon, we have Invew and Corrychalloch, and you can see the top slide, the top right. We've already done a lot of clearance of exotic trees and Rhododendron ponticum within Corrychalloch Gorge National Nature Reserve. And we're also dealing with Japanese knotweed there that has rather annoyingly got established within the vertical cliff faces of the gorge. I'm going to talk a little bit about partnerships as well, because as you're all probably aware, it's so integral that we work in partnerships if we're going to deal with invasive species collectively. So the Japanese knotweed work at Corrychalloch is part of a partnership with the Fisheries Trust a few years back, and the landowners right away along the Loch Broom, and recently with CC to try and tackle knotweed along that Broom catchment. We don't have that much knotweed in the gorge, but we're important because we're at the top of the catchment. And as you're probably aware, dealing with invasive species in a riparian situation, it's imperative that you deal with the top of the catchment approach. Well, you can forgive many landowners in some ways for turning the other cheek when it comes to dealing with such a massive problem. Rhododendron being one of them particularly. But really, to me, it's about sensible land management. Invasive species really are of no benefit to anybody. If they're allowed to just run across uncontrollably across our wild land, we lose land as a resource, we lose access, it chokes watercourses. It really is about sensible land management as well as protecting the loss of biodiversity. But what it does require is coordination, collaboration, policy and resource. And I would say that this is still lacking despite our national strategic framework. But there are some good initiatives. CC is one example, and a lot of the work that the charities are putting in, including ourselves and communities. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about this as the conference unfolds. So if we're going to deal with invasive species, we really do need to tackle it on a landscape scale. And we, again, working in partnership with Mantra Ecology, who we'll hear a little bit more later on, talking about techniques. And they have a designer in their team, and they've produced this rather attractive leaflet. And we've used this to really win hearts and minds, to go out, go door knocking, speak to people, and to try and tackle rhododendron, which here, this is a Torridon, creeping up the hillside, the slopes of Liagach on very tough terrain, scree terrain, very difficult to control in this type of environment. So it's imperative that we deal with these situations with the community. We speak to the community and we try and get them on board. If they can get buy-in and participation, that's half the battle. So pretty much the rhododendron that we saw in that last slide has been tackled along the hillside. So we're down to follow-up work, but the invasive species seed source is still there around this settlement. And we're really making great strides here. Initially, there was quite a few people were not particularly supportive. They wondered why we were doing it. They thought it was an attractive plant. They didn't see the problem. And it's very difficult to ask people to remove plants from the gardens, but we've actually made great headway. This is a lovely lady called Morag, and she has allowed us to come in. There's a garden team from MVU. We've brought our chipper in, chainsaw down, stump treated, and it's been a real symbiotic relationship in that we've cleared the rhododendron, it's sold the seed source, and she has her beautiful views of the loch. Just to illustrate this case study, if you like, again, this is at the back of the garden, beautiful little garden with a little water feature in here. We've ripped all of this rhododendron out, opened the whole thing up, and the garden backs onto the open hills, so that's dealt with that seed source. And we've also offering a little incentive that people might want to replace some of these lost rhododendron flowering plants with non-invasive cultivars. Not too many people have particularly bothered about that. They're actually just quite happy to see it removed, but there is something there that we can offer. Balmacar has also come up with the idea of a voucher scheme, so which makes it a little bit more efficient to manage that particular aspect. And we're already doing this at Balmacar, and this will be extended as well into next year's Wipeout work. Here's just another example of us taking out a invasive rhododendron hedge, which was seeding back up into a crofter forester scheme behind this settlement, causing a lot of problems within that woodland. And just doing another. So these are positive stories to talk about, dealing with the community, plant swap schemes. But I've just popped this slide up to highlight the difficulty sometimes working with media. We have had some very, very positive stories working with the BBC, with Landlord, and partnership with Plant Life. And generally, they're very helpful in raising awareness. But media as it is can sometimes be devil's advocate, as you can see in this headline. And I was actually asked to do another article with the Herald this week. And it was a lot better. They managed to pick up on some of my positive language about habitat restoration. But at the same time, it was all about battling an alien species. They can't seem to avoid using that language. And even the National Trust ourselves, we have these fantastic banners that we've produced to promote all of our work, from footpath work to various aspects. And we're using that language of alien species, which is quite emotive. And I think it's important that we try and use the language of habitat protection and restoration. And this is what it's all about, isn't it? It's about protecting biospheres, it's about protecting habitats, really important native wildlife. And I think the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforest has been a fantastic organisation, which Julie's going to speak a little bit about later on. And again, there's partnership work tying in that, because a lot of the rainforests are, one of the biggest threats is Rhododendron ponticum. So we've shared knowledge, we've shared advocacy and awareness raising, and I think they're a fantastic organisation that is beneficial to myself, in that they're raising awareness about this wonderful habitat, and at the same time it helps when you're trying to win hearts and minds in regards to tackling invasive non-native species. The National Trust for Scotland have been one of the key exponents of stem treatment. I'm a big supporter of it. I think it's efficient, it's targeted, and it's a good way of dealing with things in these sensitive environments, this Scottish rainforests, or Atlantic woodland, if you like. And we're going to hear a lot more about that through mantra ecology later on in the conference. Now, this is Crocosmia. Some people might know it as Montbretian. I've put this slide up because this is a Schedule 9 species under Section 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act. The Section 9 or the Section 14 species actually apply to England and Wales. In Scotland, the Wain Act had a broader brush approach, but the Wain Act does allow it really allows for Scotland to adopt this internationally recognised 3-stage approach. And the first 2 stages are about prevention and rapid response. Now, this is just common sense, really. If we can tackle these problems before they get out of hand, before they become a big cost, then it makes sense to do this. And I'd argue that this is one of the areas that we're still not coordinated. There isn't really a system in place, politically or strategically, to nip these things in the bud. I think Nature Scot themselves have acknowledged that these pathways are such a problematic. We need to try and deal with the pathways, network rail, for example, and some of our road systems. Can we somehow coordinate a better approach? Or is it left to communities and local people to try and tackle them through grants and through some of the work that we've done through advocacy and liaison? So I think some of you might recognise some of these pictures. This is up on the River Ewe. We can see the Montbretian here creeping into this lovely species-rich Filipendula meadow, sweet meadow. And here down we have a little remnant patch of forget-me-nots and this lovely marsh anquifoil. I'll be very sad if I drive past here one day to see that the Montbretian has finally pushed it out. So it is a problem species, and something that I just wanted to raise here in regards to how important it is to try and put prevention and rapid response in place where we can. The National Trust for Scotland have been trying to be innovative and try to get good positive messages through different types of endeavours. This is where we've been producing charcoal from the raw material of Rhododendron ponticum. And we've done this across quite a few properties, actually. Invasive has been one of them, but several properties have been producing charcoal. It just gets a really good positive message through a product. We're producing this, if you like, eco charcoal from the Rhododendron ponticum. But the development from that is that the Wipeout project is going to purchase a special kiln, which burns at a much higher temperature, and it produces a product called the biochar. So this is going again over at Invasive Garden, and we'll use this this biochar to put back into the soil. The biochar creates macro sort of activity within the soil, macrofauna activity, improves the structure of the soil. So essentially the message is that we're using invasive product, an invasive plant that is actually damaging to the soil, and we're going to actually improve the soil through that end product. So I think that's another positive message to get over.
Just Rob, 15. That's been 15 minutes now.
We're 15. That's fine, Kaz. Thanks. I'm actually on my last slide here, and I just wanted to bring this up because I did a little bit of research before this talk, and I was just interested in the resource and the money being spent. As Kaz said at the beginning, we think it's something like 250 million the Scottish economy that it's costing with invasive species. Now, this is the Wildlife and Countryside link, and they're doing something of a bit of a campaign. It's a group of organisations, charities, that are looking to campaign to try and influence, if you like, the government to try and invest more invasive non-native species. And it seems to make sense to me. Whilst these statistics are the UK as a whole, it's proportionate to Scotland, and it applies to us just as much as it does the UK. We might have less species if they're invasive, but of course these invasive species are going to be on the move. So I think that these statements of providing jobs, training and boosting for our green recovery from COVID-19, there's an estimated 40 new species will establish by 2040 without government action. And the statistic here, I've edited it down, there's quite a lot more if you want to go onto this website. But this cost of 3.4 billion in the next 20 years, we could, if we put this sort of investment into it, of 6 million a year across the UK as a whole, we'll slash this cost by 80%. Now, that seems to make a lot of sense to me. But if that sort of natural capital, if you like, is not taken up by the government, then it's left to people like yourselves out there that are tackling with invasive species, charities like the National Trust for Scotland, to carry on the good work that we can, and to try and work collectively and collaboratively as best as we can. And I think the biosphere offers a good opportunity. The fact that it's got that biosphere title, I think it's an area where we've got great habitats such as the rainforest, we've got natural nature reserves, we've got deer management groups that it's of no use really for them to see rhododendron sweeping across the landscape, and certainly for the deer or the habitats. So I think we've got a collective common cause here. I think that in the biosphere, we live in an incredibly special environment for those people that live within the Wester Ross Biosphere. And I think it's an environment that people really love living in and they care about. So tackling invasive species has to be a shared objective. I think there's a catalyst to attract support and funding and deal with invasive species collectively. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'm really looking forward to the other presentations and the workshops later on. And I'm open for questions.